Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Okay, let's dig into this. Imagine, just for a second, feeling like you're constantly being watched, harassed, targeted even by some kind of invisible network.
Mhm.
Not just random people, but like organized groups. Maybe even, groups connected to government agencies.
Yeah, that's pretty much the reality described by people who call themselves targeted
That's
individuals.
a chilling idea.
It really is. And what jumps out from their accounts is this deep sense of vulnerability, almost paranoia. They're not talking about just a few odd things happening. They describe this coordinated, secret program.
A program involving what exactly?
Everything from psychological games, manipulation, all the way to claims of, well, advanced weaponry being used against them. The sheer number of people who seem to believe this is happening, it's a phenomenon in itself.
And there's one name that keeps popping up in these accounts, right? Infragard.
Exactly. Infragard. So to really get a handle on these claims, we kind of need to ask, what is Infragard? And, what part do these individuals claim it plays in all this?
Right. So this deep dive is really for you if you're curious about where things like national security, civil liberties, and these sometimes hidden corners of the internet overlap,
Yeah.
where these claims are being made.
Yeah, we'll explore the definitions they use, the tactics they allege are used against them, the legal battles they're fighting. We're trying to understand what's actually being reported here and, well, why it matters.
And where are we getting this information from today?
So our main source is an organization called Targeted Justice, Inc. They're a 501c3 that advocates for targeted individuals. We're looking at their public statements, and also a pretty significant civil lawsuit they filed against some high-ranking U.S. government officials.
Okay. So to really grasp this whole narrative, maybe we should start with the basics. Who exactly do these targeted individuals, or two eyes, say they are? And what is this program they keep describing?
Well, according to Targeted Justice, they define TIs as victims of government weaponization. They believe they're unwilling subjects in some kind of experimental CIA torture program.
Torture program. That's strong language.
It is. They claim it's designed to, quote, break down the individual and neutralize the person. And the method is supposedly using intense psychological, physical, and emotional stress.
And what's the bigger picture goal they allege? It's not just about individuals.
No, the alleged ultimate goal, as they describe it, is much bigger, controlling the entire population, using intimidation, fear, threats.
Who do they say gets targeted? Is it random?
Well, they often mention whistleblowers,
Mm-hmm.
political activists. They even specifically mention J6ers, scientists, Christians. But, and this is interesting, they also say many are just randomly chosen. A common theme is the destruction of family ties, marriages.
And they connect this to past government programs.
They do. They frame it as a sort of hybrid combining elements of the CIA's old MK-Ultra mind control project, which is infamous, and the FBI's COINTELPRO program, which targeted activists. By making these connections, they're emphasizing, the alleged government hand and the secrecy involved.
So how does someone supposedly end up in this program? What's the trigger?
The claim is that it starts with being illegally placed on these unconstitutional subcategories of the FBI's terrorist screening database. You probably know it as the watch list.
Okay, but not the main terrorist list.
That's what they argue. They point to very specific things like handling codes 3 and 4 or something called non-investigative subjects, NIS.
NIS.
Yeah, non-investigative subjects. These are supposedly sublists within the database that contain names of people with, and this is their key point, no ties to terrorism. They're not considered known or suspected terrorists.
And the numbers they claim are involved.
They're pretty staggering. Based on their sources, they estimate maybe 300,000 TIs just in the U.S.
Wow.
and potentially over 5.5 million across the globe.
That's huge. The lawsuit you mentioned, does it get into how people supposedly get on this list?
It does. It alleges that nominations can come from, well, almost anywhere. Private citizens, corporations, intelligence agencies. And they mention a specific document, Form FD 930, which they call illegal, and claim lacks any real due process. They even cite a former deputy director of the Terrorist Screening Center, Timothy Grow, supposedly admitting that the database does include names of people who aren't considered known or suspected terrorists.
So who do they say is running the show,
Yeah.
pulling the strings on this alleged program?
The blame is usually pointed towards the deep state, specifically agencies like the FBI, DHS, and the CIA.
And fusion centers come up too, right?
Yeah, fusion centers are highlighted. Some accounts call them the Stasi arm of DHS, funded and controlled by Homeland Security, and acting as the sort of command centers for the harassment for the gangstalking.
Is there any outside corroboration on fusion centers?
Well, the TI cite a 2012 Senate subcommittee report. Now, this report did criticize fusion centers, saying they wasted money and stepped on Americans' civil liberties and often produced intelligence unrelated to terrorism. So TIs point to that as supporting their concerns.
Okay, so that's the alleged structure. But what about the experience itself? What does it actually feel like, according to these accounts? They talk about gang stalking and electronic harassment.
Right. These aren't just minor annoyances in their narrative. It's described as a relentless campaign to essentially break someone down psychologically.
So what kinds of tactics are we talking about with gang stalking?
Well, common themes are, first, surveillance, constant watching, following, both in person and electronically.
Okay.
Then they're spreading false information, rumors, lies designed to trash someone's reputation, make them look unstable or crazy.
That sounds isolating.
Exactly. Social isolation is another key tactic they describe. Manipulating friends, family, coworkers, even neighbors, getting them to turn against the target.
And psychological games, too.
Definitely. Things like gaslighting, making the target doubt their own memory, their sanity, and even public humiliation tactics like groups of people suddenly laughing loudly at the target in public for no clear reason.
It gets weirder, though, right? I read about low-level sabotage.
Yeah, what they call physical sabotage, but often of low-value items. So things like entering a home or a car to subtly change things, move objects, change settings, or minor damage like scratching paint, cutting upholstery, maybe stealing small specific items like scissors, papers, photos.
Why do that? What's the point of stealing scissors?
The alleged goal is specific. Make the target seem forgetful, disorganized, or delusional. If you keep losing small things or finding settings changed, you start to doubt yourself, and others might too. It erodes credibility.
Okay, that makes a disturbing kind of sense. What else?
They also report what they call trade-related punishment. Things like utility crews always doing noisy work right outside, taxis deliberately being late, bus drivers skipping their stop, repair people messing up jobs, lab techs maybe falsifying results, police stops for trivial reasons, even store staff removing a favorite product right before they get there.
Wow. And even harassment at home.
Mm-hmm. Noise campaigns are common, constant leaf blowers, loud music, drilling sounds, people hitting golf balls against the house, frequent sirens nearby, finding trash left in their yard, and sometimes really horribly scaring or even killing pets.
God, that's awful.
And the key thing they stress is that all these activities are designed to be deniable.
Plausible deniability.
Exactly. Each incident could just be bad luck or normal life annoyances. It makes it incredibly hard for the target to prove anything malicious is happening, even though they feel certain it's orchestrated.
It's this deniability that makes it so insidious, you can see that, and then it moves into technology claims, right?
Yeah.
Which gets even more, well, controversial.
Yes. This is where we get into directed energy weapons, or DWs, and voice-to-skull technology, V2K.
Okay, break that down. DWs.
They report being tracked and attacked, they say, with high-powered microwave HPM weapons. They claim these come from satellites, specifically naming Lockheed GPS satellites run by U.S. Space Force out of Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado.
Satellites. And also cell towers.
And cell towers, yes. They allege panel antennas use something called digital beamforming to create focused microwave bullets. They even cite a U.S. patent, 10,164,694, related to this kind of antenna tech.
And what do these alleged attacks feel like?
The symptoms they describe sound a lot like Havana syndrome. Things like sudden loud noises, pain in the ears or head, intense head pressure, a feeling of vibration, dizziness, tinnitus, visual problems, cognitive issues, and even claims of painful microwave burns on the skin.
Okay, wow. And then V2K. Voice to skull.
Right. They describe this as pulse-modulated voice signature, or a microwave auditory effect, and again, they cite a patent, U.S. patent, 4,877,027.
So what is it supposed to do?
The claim is it uses high-frequency electromagnetic energy beamed at the head, but modulated in a way that creates sound inside the person's mind. Specifically, computer-generated derogatory verbiage.
Like what?
Horrible stuff. Hearing voices saying things like, "You're stupid," or "Why don't you kill yourself?" directly in their head, apparently.
That's terrifying.
It is. And they also mention other effects like artificial tinnitus, constant ringing, and severe sleep deprivation caused by these alleged technologies. They insist that no private group could possibly have the capability for such widespread DEW or V2K attacks, pointing the finger back at state actors.
And this connects to even broader mind control claims.
It does. Some sources allege that subliminal messages are constantly broadcast to everyone, 247 from cell towers, supposedly controlled by the same Schriever Space Force base, citing that same patent, 4,877,027 again.
Directed at everyone, what's the supposed effect?
The assertion is that maybe a third of the population is highly suggestible and easily manipulated by these messages, that they're effectively in a kind of deep trance, even while awake, making them easy to use in street theater scenarios or other parts of the Gangstalking campaign.
Okay, that's a lot. Now let's bring it back to Infragard. This organization seems central to many of these allegations, particularly the gang-stalking part.
It really does. Targeted Justice, the advocacy group, is incredibly blunt. They explicitly label Infragard a terrorist organization that is controlled by the FBI.
That is an extremely serious accusation. A terrorist organization.
Yes. They accuse Infragard members of carrying out illegal surveillance, harassment, break into people's homes. They threaten, they steal, conduct property damage, assault and battery, and even attempted murder, all supposedly directed at TIs.
And Infragard it's basically a partnership between the FBI and the private sector, right? For critical infrastructure protection.
That's its official purpose, yes. But Targeted Justice estimates it has over 66,000 members in the U.S., and they see this network not as protective, but as a tool for this alleged harassment program.
How do they claim the FBI is involved with Infragard in this context?
They point to the eGuardian computer network. They claim the system allows communication between the FBI, those fusion centers we mentioned, and Infragard members, and that it's used specifically to conspire against targeted individuals.
Are other groups mentioned besides Infragard?
Yes, they also frequently name groups like Citizen Corps and Neighborhood Watch programs as being involved in the ground-level gang-stalking operations.
So why, according to TIs, involve these private or quasi-private groups like Infragard and Citizen Corps?
The alleged reason is about avoiding scrutiny. They claim the FBI and DHS use these groups as a way to get around Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests, essentially to hide the alleged criminal activity by outsourcing it.
Keep it off the official book, so to speak.
That seems to be the allegation. The lawsuit we've been discussing names Infragard and Citizen Corps directly. It calls them citizen policing organizations and claims the terrorist screening database, the watch list, was widely shared with them.
Shared with private citizens.
That's the claim. And that these groups then perpetrate illegal rogue vigilante conduct against NIS, those non-investigative subjects, making them believe they're targeting actual terrorists when they're allegedly not.
So the lawsuit wants to stop this.
Yes, it seeks a permanent injunction. It wants to stop the government defendants from devising, perpetrating, and enabling the surveillance, stalking, and torture through fusion centers and contractors like Infragard, Citizen Corps, or anyone else they might use.
Looking at the bigger picture then, how do TIs frame the overall severity of what they believe is happening?
They use incredibly strong terms. The lawsuit calls it an illegal covert human experimentation and persecution program on a global scope. The goal, it says, is to control and destroy opposition. They talk about hundreds of thousands of Americans being subjected to premeditated torture and denied the basic presumption of innocence.
Terms like crimes against humanity and prison without walls are used.
Exactly. It paints a picture of complete entrapment and persecution.
And they also bring in discrimination claims.
They do. Based on their own data collection from TIs, Targeted Justice points to a few things. First, sex discrimination. They say about 66.6% of TIs reporting to them are women. And they contrast that with national crime stats showing men commit the vast majority of crimes, about 73.5%. They argue this inverse correlation points to discrimination, even calling it a massive hate crime against women.
Are there other discrimination claims?
Yes, political discrimination. Their surveys apparently show that 52% of TIs identify as Republican voters, compared to only 9% Democrat. They suggest this means people are being targeted based on political beliefs.
And economic status.
That too. Their statistics show really high rates of hardship among TIs compared to national averages. 14% homeless versus 0.5% nationally, 35% living with relatives, 67% unemployed versus 3.7% nationally, and 40% reporting indigence, having less than $100.
So the argument is the program actively pushes people into poverty.
Yes, that it's designed to push them into a downward economic spiral, which would obviously make them more vulnerable and less able to fight back.
For years, these kinds of claims were often dismissed as mental health issues, right? The plausible deniability you mentioned.
Right. That was the standard response. But the lawsuit argues that having hundreds, specifically 450 targeted justice members, plus potentially thousands more TIs, all telling substantially similar stories, well, they argue that this consistency is piercing the veil of secrecy. It makes it harder to just dismiss everyone individually.
And the lawsuit itself is pretty remarkable. Who are they actually suing?
They're going right to the top. Targeted justice and 15 named plaintiffs. And the plaintiffs have some interesting backgrounds. A medical doctor, a retired NSA analyst, an investigative journalist who's also an attorney, a former FBI agent, an architect, an engineer, an anthropologist.
Quite a list.
It is. And they are suing the Attorney General, the FBI director, the director of the Terrorist Screening Center, and the Secretary of Homeland Security. High-ranking officials.
On what grounds? What laws do they claim are being broken?
Multiple U.S. constitutional amendments. The first for free speech association, fourth against unreasonable search and seizure, fifth for due process, sixth for rights in criminal prosecutions, eighth against cruel and unusual punishment, and the 14th for equal protection. Plus, the UN Convention Against Torture.
What kind of evidence do they cite in the lawsuit itself?
They pull together various pieces. There's an affidavit from 2011 by a former FBI special agent in charge, Ted Gunderson, who claimed thousands of innocent victims were being targeted by a rogue criminal enterprise within the government.
Okay, what else?
They mentioned Kash Patel, a former government official, stating that 275,000 Americans were illegally targeted by FISA surveillance in 1 year. They also point to DHS Inspector General audits from 2009 and 2021 that flagged widespread noncompliance with FBI FISA procedures and repeated the criticism that fusion centers stepped on Americans' civil liberties.
And that statistic about the watch list itself.
Right. They lean heavily on citing FBI data, allegedly showing that 97% of people on the terrorist screening database are actually not terrorists.
97%.
Which, of course, raises the question, if they aren't terrorists, who are they and why are they on this list with all the associated consequences? The lawsuit really emphasizes the lack of any notification or meaningful way for these alleged NIS individuals to challenge their status, leading to what they call an unconstitutional perennial designation as a person of interest.
So wrapping this up, what we've unpacked today is, it's a really complex and, frankly, deeply disturbing narrative.
It absolutely is. You have individuals identifying as targeted individuals, describing this vast clandestine program. They believe it weaponizes government agencies, even private partners like Infragard, using this whole range of tactics from psychological warfare and sabotage all the way up to alleged directed energy weapons.
And the core claim really seems to hinge on this idea of being unconstitutionally blacklisted on subsections of the terrorist screening database, being targeted for reasons totally unrelated to actual terrorism, and being stripped of fundamental rights in the process.
Exactly. And the fact that they filed this major lawsuit against top government officials really underscores how seriously they view these claims and the lengths they're going to seek justice.
This whole deep dive, it really throws a spotlight on that tension, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Between legitimate national security needs and individual civil liberties.
It certainly does.
It leaves you with a pretty challenging question, I think. In this age where surveillance tech is everywhere, information spreads instantly, how do we make sure the tools and partnerships we create to protect us don't somehow get twisted or create new ways to harm people or, as these individuals claim, become actual instruments of hidden persecution?
Mm-hmm. That's a lot to think about, especially concerning the information landscape we all have to navigate these days.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.